Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum. How are you? Alhamdulillah. Surviving.
السلام عليكم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وقال الله تعالى بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة. Today I'll talk about the book, the language, and the role of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I will recite to you several verses first, which have one common root word, and then we'll talk about the explanation of all of these verses in the context of the Quran, why in Arabic language, why an Arabic prophet, and what is the role of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with respect to the Quran. So the first verses are the first 4 verses from Surah Ar-Rahman. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Ar-Rahman allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan, allamahu al-bayan. The word that I want you to focus on is al-bayan. The root word is bana, yabinu, or bain, from which different words come. Bayan is one, mubin another word, and then tabi'in, yubayyinu, tubayyinu. These words come in the Quran on several occasions, and they're all in the context of the topic of this khutbah: the Quran, the Arabic language, and the role of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Next verses are from Al-Ma'idah. Ya ahlal kitab qad ja'akum rasuluna yubayyinu lakum. Again, yubayyinu lakum kathiran mimma kuntum tukhfuna min al-kitab wa ya'fu an kathirin qad ja'akum min Allahi nurun wa kitabun mubin. So Rasul yubayyin, who explains. Kitab mubin. Next one, Ash-Shu'ara. Innahu latanzilu rabbil alamin. نزل به الروح الأمين على قلبك لتكون من المنذرين بلسان عربي مبين. Language mubin, book mubin, Rasul explainer. Next verses from Surah An-Nahl. بالبينات Surah An-Nahl. بالبينات والزبور وأنزلنا إليك الذكر لتبين للناس ما نزل إليهم ولعلهم يتفكرون. Pay attention. تبين comes first. يتفكرون comes later on. Next, وما أنزلنا عليك الكتاب إلا لتبين لهم الذي اختلفوا فيه وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون. Next, قل إنما العلم عند الله وإنما أنا نذير مبين. So bayan mubin, kitab mubin, language is mubin, warner is mubin. So I want you to focus on these words. So now let's start with the verses of Surah Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is he most merciful? What are the qualities that make him the most merciful? That we thank him for his mercy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. First is Allama al-Quran. He taught the Quran. Now does it tell us who did he teach the Quran? It doesn't say here. Next is Khalaq al-Insan. He created insan. So the ta'lim of Quran is mentioned before the takhliq of insan, which means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the Quran to someone before even creating the human beings. Otherwise there is no other way of explaining this sequence. And by the way, this is from Imam Razi. And then Allamahul Bayan. Allah created the insan and then taught him. One would have expected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Allamahul Quran. He taught him the Quran. But he didn't say this. He said Allamahul Bayan. So what is going on here, and what's the characteristic feature of al-bayan? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that He created insan and He taught him al-bayan? We'll talk about it in the context of anthropology and social sciences. So Imam Razi, I'll just read it into English, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually wrote the Quran before He created anything. It's a kalamullah, it's written forever. But it was put in kitabun maknoon fi lawhin mahfuz. Actually, في كتاب مكنون إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. That this book, the honorable Quran, it's in a hidden book which cannot be touched by anybody except by the highly purified angels who are al-muqarrabun to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they were taught Quran first, and then the next verse of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Tanzilun min Rabbil Alameen. So the scholars say that the Talim of Quran came before the Tanzil of Quran to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the people who were taught the Quran even before it was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were the angels. They knew what is written. They had access given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They could log on to their accounts and look at it. But the Tanzil came afterwards to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now, what is the significance of this word al-bayan? So let me take you through this history, this historical thing. What's the explanation of al-bayan given by our own scholars? Imam Raghib al-Isfahani mentioned the term al-bayan denoting the means whereby a thing is intellectually circumscribed and made clear. So bana yabinu actually means to clarify, to expose, to explain, to communicate, to clarify. But it is here an intellectual process. And Muhammad Asad mentions communication of articulate thought and speech. In other words, first you have to formulate an idea, and then you have to put it into words, and you should know how to communicate to others. It's a very complex process. Tajul Urus, which is another Arabic dictionary, says it applies to both thought and speech. So thinking and speech. Always think before you speak. We speak before we think. It applies to both thought and speech in as much as it comprises the faculty of making a thing or an idea apparent to the mind and conceptually distinct from other things or ideas, as well as the power to express this cognition clearly in spoken or written language.
Right, but if you give me...
This is what the Prophet did. He received the message, he understood it, and then he explained it through him, the Sahaba, and then the students. And so we will talk about that. So now when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Khalaq al-insan, who is he referring to? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, he told the angel, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. And the answer from the angels was, will you create someone who will tasfaqu ad-dima' tufsidu fiha, who will shed blood and create fasad in it? That tells us that there were some species on this planet before the human beings who fought, who were violent, who shed blood, who created fitna. And our scholars, including Ibn Kathir, will tell us that there were some species, they call them Hin and Bin, who inhabited the earth before. Some say they were jinn who were here. And then another explanation is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a group of angels, an army of angels, headed by Iblis, who killed all of them, and then Iblis was given this high status of beings in the Malaikatul Muqarrabin with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is religion. What does science tell us? The science of anthropology and social sciences and so forth. And I'll be quoting from different books, I'm not an expert on it. We human beings are called Homo sapiens sapiens. And there are at least 5 to 7 different Homo species before us. The characteristic of Homo species compared with other animals, including chimpanzees and gorillas, is called number 1, bipedalism. Bipedalism means the ability to stand erect on 2 feet. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ التَّقْوِيمِ. Indeed, we have created human beings in the best taqweem. The people who know Arabic can say, قَامَ يَقُومُ. So taqweem means a stature, a posture. The best posture was given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of the Homo species are bipedal. But they became extinct and Homo sapiens survived. Why? So let's just take a very brief survey. It is mentioned that Homo erectus, the erect bipedal human species or humanoid species, first appeared on this planet about 2 million years ago. I don't know much details about it. They had other subspecies until they disappeared, and another species emerged about 800,000 years ago, Homo neanderthalensis. They were more robust and stronger than Homo sapiens. And there was a time period based upon fossil records that these Homo species coexisted on this planet. And eventually the others were driven out, overcome, overwhelmed, and destroyed by Homo sapiens. And Homo sapiens survived. Why did Homo sapiens survive? Okay. And I'm quoting from a book written by the name of Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. If you want to read, you can read that book. One of my colleagues mentioned that it's difficult to remain Muslim after reading this book, but didn't affect me. Just give me some knowledge. So they mentioned that Homo sapiens survived due to their advanced linguistic abilities and communication skills. What would be the Arabic word for it? Al-Bayan, based upon the explanation that I've given you. Allamahul Bayan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, that is he taught Quran to angels. Khalaq al-Insan, created human being. And then not Allamahul Quran, but Allamahul Bayan. That we human beings should be thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His mercy, that He gave us this quality called Al-Bayan. It is through Him that we got it. Now, Noah Harari also mentioned something, that all other animals use their communication system only to describe reality. And he gives an explanation that a chimpanzee may say, look, there is a banana tree over there. Let's go and get bananas. Very simple mode of communication. Imagine humans, in contrast, use their language not merely to describe reality, but also to create new realities, fictional realities. It then goes on and on. But basically what the human beings did was they were able to communicate to each other. If they developed some technology, they were able to teach others. They also spread out, they developed language, and that through this language they were able to engage in trading, mixing with each other, intermarriages and so forth. But what was happening at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, what was happening to the languages? So I explained the insan being given the capability of al-bayan by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then Allah is talking about kitabun mubin, lisanin arabiyyin mubin, and nazirun mubin. So how do we explain those things? Language may have started at some point in time, at some place, maybe in multiple places. It was probably a sign language. But when you see this thing, the first human being who saws an apple didn't say apple or tuffa or any other language. They must have had some sign language to communicate to others, I found this thing, we can eat it, or a banana, whatever it is. But once language developed, people started to write down. And the first writing that we know was from Mesopotamia by the Sumerian, who started write on clay tablets by using the edge of a pen, making wages. And it was called cuneiform writing. The first book, if you can call it book, which is found to have been written in this script, is the Epic of Gilgamesh, about 5,000 years from now, 5 to 5,500. And people learned how to read that language, and it has been transcribed. Initially, the language was used to keep record or inventory of things. But eventually fiction, literature also came into being. And then somehow the Greeks started the writing process with a 20-letter alphabet or something like that. By the time the Prophet ﷺ was born, Greek and Latin languages were dying. They are now dead languages in any way. The Jews were the highly educated people at that time. After Alexander had conquered, they became what they call, the social scientists call Hellenization. They adopted the Greek methods, and instead of Hebrew, they were doing the writing in Greek language. They were not very inclusive. They still remain not very inclusive. And they kept on to that tradition. They didn't teach Hebrew to others and so forth. So Hebrew was not a good means of communication at that time. The English language that we know now and the English language of that time, we don't even know what kind of English language that was. The first book that we think was written in English was Beowulf about 1,000 years ago, and some of the high schoolers may have read it. But if you look at the actual Beowulf, the language doesn't sound like English at all. In fact, even the Shakespearean English is very different from what it is now. So the only language that was in the very highly intellectually advanced form at that time was the Arabic language, Arabian Mubin, that Allah chose to reveal His book. That this language had the capacity to express very deep, complex ideas in very few words. The Prophet said, "Utitu bi jawami al-kalim." I have been given the capability of expressing a lot of thoughts in very few words. And this can be done in Arabic language. And it was done even before Islam came. The early Arabic poetry, Saba Muallaqat, are still taught in the schools of India and Pakistan so that we can get the flavor of the language at that time. And that language, the Fusha, is still there. It's the only language that has been kept alive by a book. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose this language to reveal the book Kitabim Mubin, Bilisanin Arabi Mubin, and giving the responsibility to the Nazirul Mubin, the man, the warner who has been given the ability to explain those things. So now look at the role of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Quran was being revealed, the Prophet ﷺ would hasten. He would be very eagerly waiting for Jibreel ﷺ to come, and he would keep following very quickly. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'ana, la tuharrik bihi lisana." Don't move your tongue too quickly, litajala bihi, so that you hurry it. Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'ana. It is our responsibility to collect the Quran and to make it recited. فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. So when we recite it, it was Jibreel ﷺ was reciting, but Allah said we, Jibreel is reciting with our command, our words. فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. Your responsibility, first responsibility, to follow this recitation. The next one is very important. ثُمَّ إِنَّا عَلَيْنَا بَيَانًا. The word bayan comes again. Then it is our responsibility to explain it. But how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explain it? Did He come with a tafsir to all of us and say, "This is the tafsir of my book"? Did He talk to every human being? Did He send an angel to every human being to explain the Quran? No. So who was given the responsibility of Bayanul Quran? Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the verses that I recited. Inna wa anzalna ilayka dhikra litubayyana lin-nasi ma nuzila ilayhim wa la'allahum yatafakkarun. There are two parts. And the tartib of these words is extremely important. As I explained the first 4 verses of Surah Rahman, there is a lot of sense in the tartib organization. Similarly here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that we reveal to you the zikr, the reminder. Inna nanu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. Quran is referred to in the Quran as zikr. We have indeed revealed the zikr, the reminder, and we are guarding it. So purpose litubayyana lin-nas, that you explain, clarify, expose these words to whom? The Arabs who already knew the Arabic language. So why do you choose a man to explain the words written in the same language? It's not easy. Somebody said that he aced SAT and he got the highest score in the English component of SAT. Now he goes to medical school and said, all the books of medicine are written into English. I aced English. I don't need to attend any lectures. I can just read the books on my own. Words need to be explained because words have concepts. And so who was the first one to whom Allah revealed the Quran? The Prophet ﷺ. Who was the first one who was taught the Quran? Prophet ﷺ. And through him came the Sahaba. They knew the Arabic language, but they would still come to the Prophet ﷺ to understand the Quran because it's a sea of knowledge. Nobody can go down to the depth of it. Even if you are a PhD in Arabic language, you still need to study from a scholar. It's not easy to understand the Quran. The zikr is very easy. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ. We have made the Quran very easy for zikr. But when it comes to the tadabbur of Quran, the tafakkur of the Quran, it is for لا يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم. Nobody can really understand the real meaning of the mutashabihat except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and those who have command in knowledge of the book, Quranic knowledges, Quranic sciences. But here the sequences I want to focus is first is to explain to the people what has been revealed to them. The Prophet's role was not simply to convey the book, it was also to clarify the book. And then, perhaps they will reflect. So tafakkur comes after the tab'een. What it means is, you don't just pick up the Quran, 8 volume of Edward Land's Arabic English dictionary and say, I can study the Quran. The Sahaba did not require a dictionary, it was in their own language. Yet they went to the Prophet to learn it. Ibn Abbas had a madrasa on the road actually, where people will come, one day will be for Arabic language, another for literature, another day for Quran, for Hadith, for fiqh. We read it in the books. They were all Arabs. And they are still attending these classes so that they can understand it. And then comes the level of tafakkur. Now, when we enter into medical school, the very first step, you don't say, I'm going to write a research paper. You have to go through a proper process of learning things from teachers. You might say, my intellectual level is higher than my teachers. No, forget about it. That's arrogance. Confidence and arrogance are two different words. You have to learn. I might have mentioned Khalid Abul Fadl, some of you may know, he has written a lot of books. His website is Scholar in the House. And he himself said that when I started studying from a chef, I had this arrogance in my mind. So he said, I would sit down, the chef would not even talk to me. But at lunchtime, he would say, go and bring my lunch from my home, while he will continue teaching. So that went on and on for days and days. He said, why is he picking on me? Of all the other students, he tells me to go and bring it. So one day he said, Khalid, do you know why I sent you? He said, no teacher, I wanted to ask you, but I didn't want to ask you. He said, I saw some arrogance in you. And arrogance is a barrier in learning. You would not learn until you come down from your pedestal of arrogance to the humility of a seeker of knowledge. So I wanted to teach you a lesson that you are not very special. You are my student and you have to do what I tell you to do. This Khalid Abdul Fadl himself saying this thing. So again, we have to bow down, sit down, learn from a teacher. When Jibreel ﷺ came to the Prophet ﷺ, we read in that history, in that hadith, he sat down in front of the Prophet ﷺ, putting his hands on his knees. He's a seeker of knowledge, coming to someone who knows more. So this is the Islamic ideal of learning. The Prophet ﷺ was responsibility also continues. هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. He's the one who sent to the people of, now Ummiyin can be people who are not literate, but Ummiyin is also explained as people who live in the Qura, which is Makkah. Makkah is also known as Qura. Rasulam minhum, a prophet from among them, so that they don't feel awed, they know him. What are the responsibilities? Yatlu alayhim ayatihi. He recites to them the verses. Now when Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam made a dua, he said, Yatlu alayhim ayatihi wa yu'allimuhum al-kitaba wa yuzakkihim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed the order. He said, Yatlu alayhim ayatihi wa yuzakkihim. He recites to them the verses, he purifies them before talim. So if you look at it, Khalid Abul Fadl's incident, the teacher is purifying his heart from arrogance before teaching him. So the tazkiyah in this context, some scholars mention, is to give up your shirk, to give up your jahili ideas, and be open to receiving something new. Like you learn something that you have always been taught, and be prepared to accept a new idea. So that was the process of tazkiyah. And then yu'allimuhum al-kitab. And yu'allim from talim is a gradual process. So it happened gradually, and that wal hikmah, the wisdom. The wisdom comes after you have learned something. It's how you put your knowledge into practice, how you communicate that knowledge to others, how you use knowledge to benefit yourself and to benefit others. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولذكر الله أكبر. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد. I want to talk about two things in the last part. First is a quotation from a book written by Jonathan Brown, misquoting Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a very good book if you want to read it. And he is talking about Imam Jafar as-Sadiq rahimahullah. When Jafar as-Sadiq was asked how the Quran, despite the passage of generations, only increases in its freshness. And he replied, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make it for one specific time or one specific people. So it is new in every age, fresh for every people until the day of judgment. And then Jonathan Brown adds his own comments. The Muslim community came to an early consensus on treating the book, Quran, as a revelation that spoke to those beyond its original audience. This is for all audience. They deemed it, in the phrasing of modern ulama, good for all places and all times. So we need to re-study the Quran. Now there are about 90 verses in the Quran that have Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in it. They were all revealed in Medina. Of those 90 verses, 89 start with Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. There is only one that has Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu but does not begin with Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. And it is Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. So what's the significance of this thing? That instead of saying Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu is like the members of the Islamic community, members of the first Islamic state. There are certain commands in the Quran that are, you can say, optional. You want to do it, you do it. Otherwise, you don't have to. But this command is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, I am doing it. And my angels are doing it. What it means is, oh believers, you have no choice. If I am doing it and my angels are doing it, who are you to say it is sunnah to do this? It's now a fard on every human being. And our scholars say that at least once in our lifetime, we should make the durood on the Prophet ﷺ with the intention that I am obeying this command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can recite Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. In the same way, at least once in our lifetime, we should intentionally say this kalama that we are Muslim. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. We all have it in our heart, but it is to be verbalized as well. In any majlis, it is better to recite an ayah from the Quran and make durood on the Prophet ﷺ. If his name is mentioned repeatedly, you don't always have to have the whole durood, but at least you should say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So this is the month of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in which we thank Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala that He give us the ability to learn something from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. We should teach our children something from his life. We should learn as much as we can do about his life every day. If not every day, every week. If not every week, every month. If not every month, at least in this month of Rabiul Awwal. I personally do not consider it to be a bid'ah to feel happy in this month, to learn something, to teach others about the Prophet ﷺ. There's nothing wrong in holding any program in the masjid, having quiz competition, qiraat competition, inviting a speaker to come and talk about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. If we stop it, our generations will forget about him. We have to continue it and not try to say that this is bid'ah because the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it. He was a humble person. It was not the culture of Arabia. There's nothing haram about doing this thing. If you don't want to attend, fine. But don't criticize those who do it. Again, I'm not using the word celebration. It's feeling happy. thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this greatest blessing. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا زدنا علما ربنا زدنا علما ربنا زدنا علما وآتنا حكمة وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة وقد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
La ilaha illallah. Make your line straight, no gaps.